Again, thank you for giving me your time. Again, because I know you're busy, and I know you just came back from was it Andy Stump's podcast? Yeah.
Yeah, I did Andy Stump's podcast in Montana, and it was awesome, man. It was amazing. It'll be out in a couple weeks.
How's that trip for you? I know that was a long trip.
Amazing. It was amazing. One, it's the most beautiful. To me, it's the most beautiful part of the country, and the elevation change that you go through from Arizona, leading into Utah and Wyoming, or Utah and Montana. You go through Idaho as well. It's so epic. It's amazing.
It looked epic because I was following your Instagram and you were doing your live, and I saw that Korean what is it, burner that you were carrying?
Yeah. That
shit's pretty
epic. Mom actually convinced me to get that because she, Korean barbecue.
Right.
We used to use that in restaurants when we had Korean restaurants in North Carolina, and so she sent me the link to that original grill, and she's like, "Hey, this is the good one." She even bought it for me, and it's like the best thing, man. It's awesome.
It is. So for our Korean audience, I know because special operations in itself, it's not really a genre in Korea. I know for a fact that 99.9% of the people that are watching my channel, they probably have no idea who you are. So could you give us a basic introduction? I know you have a 20-year career, so just a rundown of your career and what you did in and out of the military.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'll say 안녕하세요, and then I come from a military background that was rooted in Korea. My dad was in the Army, stationed in different parts of Korea, and he met my mother while he was stationed there. And it's a typical GI story. Young American goes to Korea, brings back Korean wife, and really that's how it got started for me. When I was very young, growing up in mostly a white environment, an American environment, I didn't even know I was Korean. I wasn't immersed in culture until at a later time in my life. But I didn't think I was any different from anybody else, because Korea, or America specifically, if you're Korean American, African American, no matter what you are, you're just American.
Right.
And so I remember the first time in first grade, so I was probably 6 years old, we had Culture Day. And I asked my mom, I said, what can I do for culture? And she said, teach the kids how to use chopsticks. And I was like, really? They would like that? And I remember I brought in food, and I brought chopsticks for everybody, and I showed how to eat. Right. And all the kids were fascinated by that. They were like, I can't believe you use sticks to eat food. And they thought it was really cool. Right. And so I think at a young age, for the first time, I identified that I was unique in a different way. And I had culture when many Americans that I went to school with didn't have culture. So I took pride in that culture, the Korean culture, which I still do. I'm selfishly prideful about my Korean heritage. So fast forward, I joined the Army at 17 years old. And, one thing I grew up in America was all my mom, my Harmony, my mom's 6 sisters all came to America different ways, and they started businesses. They were all entrepreneurs, so they worked very hard, but they wanted independence, and they took it as an opportunity to live their dream. Right. And when they came, they aspired to be better and not as poor as they were. My family comes from Incheon, Korea. Incheon. My mom grew up with all of her sisters, taking care of them in a small house, 6 sisters and 1 brother. My grandfather served in the Army as a medic, and he passed away when my mom was very young. So they had to fend for themselves. And so she, along with her sisters, promised that they would create better lives for themselves. And that was them living the American dream, but never forgetting their heritage. So we had Korean businesses all throughout the United States. Photography, that was one of the first jobs that I did. Korean restaurants, My mom owns a salon and spa that's very, very known in North Carolina, a state in America. And so when I joined the Army, I was also taught from my mom about being disciplined, but also being proud of who you are and where you came from. So I always remembered that when I went in, and I never wanted to let my mom down. I never wanted to let my heritage down. So I tried very hard. I spent, as a 17-year-old in the Army, 4 years in the infantry. I went to, difficult schools as an infantry guy, Ranger school, airborne school, all these different things. And then after September 11th of 2001, I went into special operations. And I spent really the next, at that time, 16 years in the Army as a special forces guy. So I was, maybe in culture they might understand Green Berets. I think in Transformers, like the first one, all the Army guys were Green Berets.
Right.
I'm trying to think of any other famous movies. Oh, the horse soldiers, or what is it called? The 12. It was like it was based off the book Horse Soldiers, but it was like
right.
The 12.
With Chris Hemsworth.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I can't think of the
movie,
name, but
yeah. So I spent all my adult life in the Army, and I deployed to Iraq 5 times, Afghanistan 2 times. I was in Libya a couple times, Africa, all over the world. And then I became a contractor for the CIA, and I did that for 3 years. So all in all, 20 years of government and military service, and then I decided that I wanted to do something different. So I started a survival company that teaches civilians about mindset that we learned in the military, about better ways to physically condition yourself, better ways to protect yourself, better ways to even think and plan for maybe hikes or maybe adventures or maybe even travel. Because I think in a short period of time, whether you're in the Korean military or the American military, you learn a lot of things that civilians don't learn over a lifetime.
Right.
And so those things for me give civilians a better idea on how to be prepared, because we spend a lot of our lives in the military being prepared.
Right.
And so I started Fieldcraft Survival under that mission of trying to give back to civilians and trying to train them and trying to provide content in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah, and I see the great things that you guys are doing, especially in terms of media. Training, I can't really, because that's sort of behind the curtain. But for media, you guys have been kicking off loads of content. If I remember correctly, just a couple months back, it was kind of slow, like maybe a video per month.
Yeah.
But now it's a little more, fluid. Do you have a full-time media guy at Fieldcraft?
Yeah, we finally invested in a full-time media guy, and we made the commitment to ourselves at like 20, maybe 25,000 subscribers that we were going to invest in it. And I think we're nearly 150,000, trying to catch up with you now. But that's because we're just committed to it like you are. And so when we invest the time, when we invest in people, we want to provide the free content that's available to everybody. So that was our investment.
Right. Yeah, and I see so much value in the content that you guys are providing, and something that I took notice as someone who's been in the media industry before the military. I see so much authenticity in the content you guys are putting out and the value added to your subscribers. Obviously, the media industry and YouTube in general, social media in general, there's a lot of that missing. And I would imagine if I asked you what's your secret, you would probably say, you guys are just being yourselves. But is there a strategic way for you guys to be a little bit more authentic, or something that grounds you to be more authentic?
I think it's honesty, right? I think if we start from a place of honesty, then we're not trying to manufacture content that's outside of our understanding, outside of our education. I think the key word is substance. people have substance and then people have good cinematography skills, the balance of those two is the scale in which good content is digested. So we could get away with maybe reducing the amount of cinematography and editing and cool, sexy things by focusing on the content that has a lot of substance based on our experiences.
Right.
Meaning the idea is, if I'm not the expert, like I had a guy who was a ham radio expert, and your audience might not know a lot about ham radios, but it's a way for communications, especially in times of crisis. Well, I could read and watch a YouTube video and in an hour be able to disseminate that information to you, but it wouldn't be honest.
Right.
So instead, my tactic is, if I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, I'm going to get the subject matter expert and have them talk about their expertise, and I'm going to be the conduit, the facilitator to disseminate that information to the audience.
Right.
The combination of that and then organically talking about what we talk about based off experiences is how we do content. Like we don't do rehearsals. We rarely do second takes. We don't do big planning sessions. We say, hey, let's go out and talk about bugging out of a bad situation, which is taking yourself physically out of a bad situation and getting into a better one. The camera guy comes out, he hooks me up with audio, and he goes, what are you going to talk about? And I go, let me start out with the intro, and I just do it. Because I have a lot of experience with that. And again, I think the honesty and the substance is what people, you can only bullshit for so long. Right.
Sure.
And maybe it's a subscriber threshold. At some point, you're going to get called out. People are going to start seeing that you're not real or honest. And so the best organic way to sustain and have people gravitate towards you is just being honest from the very get-go. And that's what we've tried to do from the very beginning. I mean, sometimes I read an article, I talk about some stuff in context to give people understanding. But if I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm not going to talk about it.
Right. That's super important. That level of honesty, it really shows on camera. That's why, honestly, why I love your content. Growing up as a Korean American, did that background ever help out in your military service?
Yeah, in a lot of really weird ways. I would say one, the military is a accumulation of a whole bunch of cultures and backgrounds coming together. And if you're black, if you're white, if you're Asian, nobody cares.
Right.
Mostly people care about, again, the substance of your character.
Right.
Are you a good dude?
Right.
Are you capable of doing your job? And so being in those circles of different backgrounds and experiences and different cultures and ethnicities, I, as an Asian American, look, in America, if Koreans don't know about this, in America, if you're Asian America, you are like the neutral race. You're the race that can get away with anything, right?
Yeah.
Because black people talk crap about white people, and white people talk crap about black people, and there's this inner fighting, and there's all these media things and issues. But if you're Asian, it's like the only thing they got on you is you're getting all the slots at Harvard and Yale. You're musically talented and mathematically talented. Right. And so, you're good at martial arts, right? All those stereotypes, which were funny when I was a kid, or people made fun of me. When you grow up in the military, it's like people pay attention because, I was an MMA guy. I was a mixed martial artist guy. I was a Taekwondo guy. I was a jiu-jitsu guy. And so I'm 6'1". I'm 6'1", 240 pounds. So, but I'm very Korean. So when people see me, they're like, "Oh, cool, you're Korean, but you're big. Oh, this is cool. Like, you fit in." And so I was able to bridge a lot of communication or cultural walls that otherwise would have been put up because of you're white or you're black. The second thing, which was most beneficial for me, is being in special operations. I was able to operate in places that people weren't able to operate.
Right.
Like in northern Afghanistan, I look like I'm a Nuristani because of the proximity of China and the crossover between northern Afghanistan.
Right.
I could dress up in Afghan clothing and be in a vehicle, which I did multiple times, doing dangerous missions, and people that were looking at me at a glance would think that I'm Nuristani. I mean, my beard even grew red because I have a Norwegian background in my white side, so my head has a little bit of red hair in it, and they put, I think it's called the Hindi, which is like a dye in their beard, which is kind of red. When I was driving down the road, I looked like I was Afghani, and people would not bat an eye at me. And so that, for me in special operations, allowed me to build rapport and sit down with tribal leaders. It allowed me to bridge relationships that other people couldn't do, and allowed me to blend in to do very specific special operations in my job, which was really cool.
For foreign internal defense, being bicultural, does that ever help in terms of, I'm sure you guys have enough training before you guys go on FID operations, but do you have an upper hand having grown up bicultural?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Look, there's a lot of people in the military who join the military and they want to kick doors in and do operations, but they're not interested in foreign internal defense. For me, being multicultural and understanding that to get bad guys, you have to be immersed in the culture to be able to build trust, right? If you're going to go out with 100 Afghans on a special operation, if they don't trust you, they're not going to protect you. They're not going to defend you.
Right.
So, one, growing up in that environment, I knew the protocol. I knew that sitting down and having a conversation before you demanded anything was part of culture. There's a lot of people in the military who don't understand that. So it set me up for understanding. And what's interesting, and Koreans should understand this, throughout the world, Asians are very well respected, right? Especially throughout austere environments throughout the world. Because remember, if you're in Africa, in remote parts of Africa, your only context and understanding of what an Asian is movies. So they're watching Jackie Chan, they're watching Bruce Lee, and there's not a lot of bad Asian people portrayed in Hollywood, right? Maybe in Korean culture, because it's Korean, you have to have a good Korean and a bad Korean. But in American Western culture, it's the Asian's the good guy, or even if he's a bad guy, he's the cool bad guy, right? So I've been in places like Niger, Africa, where they look at me and they go, Bruce Lee, and I go, no, I'm bigger than Bruce Lee. No, I'm bigger than Bruce Lee. And they go, oh, okay, stronger than Bruce Lee. And immediately respect and rapport is built to allow you to do all the things you need to do to build relationships in those countries. It's a huge advantage to be Asian, to be Korean, and to be multicultural in that job.
I would imagine so. And honestly, I think for me, being bicultural, having grown up in the States, when I first went into the military, it wasn't as much as a culture shock because I've sort of bounced between cultures. And of course, the military is a little different in terms of the culture that I'm talking about. But I've listened to enough of your podcast to understand that it wasn't an easy transition. What was the transition like for you, and sort of losing that tribe within the military and just kind of being alone?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? I think it's difficult for anybody in any job. If you're let's say you're a scientist working in a field that you love, and then one day that's over, and then you look at yourself and you've identified that was your life, that was your livelihood, and then you have to be somebody else. It's hard to figure out what else you're going to be. And I think that was the difficult thing for me, was realizing that my identity wasn't necessarily a job. And opinions from operators and special forces vary, but I never looked at my identity as being a special operations guy, because deeply rooted in me, I understood that I was going to be a father. I was going to be, continue to be a son. I was going to be a best friend. I was going to be a human being. And those things that when you strip away all the jobs, all the careers, all the virtue signaling, all the bull crap, you're just a human being. And so the difference is I had to realize that, and I think most veterans that I educate have to realize that experience has made you a better human being, right? A deeper understanding of life as a human being, which creates a lot of opportunities for you to contextualize the world. Because if you realize how difficult life is and then how precious life could be, then you're not going to waste your life.
Right.
So that means you profoundly seek more value in your own life. Those life lessons from the military are priceless. And so it's not about like, oh, I'm a badass because I wore a special forces uniform, or I was a badass because I went overseas and did a whole bunch of combat. It's about understanding the value and the benefit it gave you to move forward and not be a gun guy or a tactician or a survival guy, but being just a better person. Like I'm a better businessman because of the military, because of the discipline, the understanding of task organization and planning, but I'm also a better human being and being humbled by my experiences, knowing I'm not the biggest badass, because there's dudes that I serve with that are better than me. I'm not a warmonger because I saw on the backside behind the curtain what war could do to people.
Right.
So I think that understanding is a cycle. It's a process, right? I talk about in the context of dogs. You can't have a dog that's a military dog that goes out and bites bad guys and does it for a decade or maybe even 20 years and then expect that dog to come back and sit on your lap and have your kids pet him.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
So transitionally, it's also accepting, which I had to do, the fact that this is a process. The same process that I had to go through to train to be one of the best in the military is the same process that I had to, stair-step down to realize that I wasn't that person anymore, but I was going to have value in another direction. I mean, what I would say, if anybody is not understanding this, is this application doesn't just apply. It doesn't just apply to jobs, careers, identity through military experiences, but also in trauma. Like if the military is an accumulation of grand experiences with trauma. If you're a civilian and you have no understanding of this, imagine you go through a difficult circumstance in your life. A family member passes away. The same process in which you process that, where you have a feeling of loss, sorrow, and anger and emotions, etc., to get you back to the place where you were before, is the same process that military veterans are going through when they lose the military because it was their family. Like when I got out of the military, I had a very cool resume. I was a sniper in the U.S. Army as a Green Beret, and when I went to get jobs, I actually applied, because I have a college degree as well. I applied to high-paying, significant responsibility jobs and was denied them because I was a sniper. Because despite my education, despite my experience, despite my leadership training, I mean, I was a sergeant major. I was the highest rank in the U.S. military for enlisted. Despite all that, when a company looks at me, they look at me as liability because they judge the technical skills versus the experience that I bring in other ways, like ethics, values, character. But I think that's commonplace, and I'm empathetic to people who don't understand that, because their only understanding of it is Hollywood. It's books. It's popular culture. And that's why I think a lot of what I do, I'm purpose driven to talk about it, because I want to educate people that we're not just liabilities, that we're actually in the right job, in the right role, more valuable than somebody to our left and right because of our experiences. I mean, I learned more about life and about discipline and about leadership in the military because of those experiences than somebody might get from just living life on their own. So I think a lot of military service members, they can't understand because they're not empathetic. But if they choose to have empathy and humility, they'll try to educate other people, or at the end of the day, just do what they do to prove to others that they're more capable than just being a green suit, a uniform. And you know, I'm proud of my service, but I don't want people to judge me and go, I like Mike because he was a Green Beret. Right. Well, do you even know Mike? I like Mike because he was a sniper. Yeah, but do you even know what kind of person he is? So, you know, I think it's every veteran's responsibility, especially in special operations. We are the warrior class. Let's not pretend like we're not. And let's not pretend like, if you're watching this, that we're not. Right? Every segment of society and every culture, including Korean culture, had a class of warriors whose responsibility it was to fight and defend that country. And at the very tip of that spear are guys like yourself who serve in special operations, who at the tip of the spear are responsible for the most elite, dangerous, and defense of the nation of Korea, of South Korea. And so, with all that being said, if people understand the relationship of military service, because they have to serve, and then know that in that warrior class there's going to be men and women who serve at the tip of that spear, then they're going to understand that you're bringing more value because you gave yourself, volunteering all the way up the chain, more opportunities by putting yourself at higher risk. And I think that's valuable, whether or not you're getting hired by a company or you understand your own context, the way it drives you in your own behavior and actions as an entrepreneur, as a media guy, as an influencer, as a person, as a father, are going to make you more valuable as a human. And that really at the root of it is what matters.
While you were talking about, you know, defending our country, I actually wanted to have you explain the Second Amendment for Koreans, because I feel like Koreans, they have this infatuation and they look at America and American culture and gun culture. They don't really fully grasp the history behind it. So could you kind of explain to the Korean audience about gun rights?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's really cool that I get to answer that. Having you know, the understanding of Korean culture as well as American culture. One, I would tell every Korean who's listening to this to think about the invasion of Korea from the Japanese, and imagine a history in which every Korean on the peninsula had a gun to defend their life, the lives of their family, and the nation at that time of Korea. How different history could be. Because remember, the reason that America culture has guns in its Constitution in the Second Amendment is because originally when we were founded, it was because we were separating ourselves from the oppression of other countries. Early in American history, the Spanish, if we look at the British, we were separating ourselves and trying to be free from tyranny, which included oppression. I mean, we were literally being invaded from people from across the ocean. Now, there is arguments there, and I'm very sympathetic to Native American culture and history, and the list goes on. But in modern history, in the modern era, the entire point of the Second Amendment is to allow people to be the balance between the government and the people. A lot of people think the Second Amendment has to do with the right to hunt or the right to shoot in sports, but it has nothing to do with that. The right is the right to bear arms, and to gather in militias, which means defend themselves in groups against a tyrannical government. And here's what I'll say about that. It has nothing to do about a literal war, but it's more figurative that if the balance of powers is the government understanding that the people are armed, and that freedom-loving Americans, which have many liberties, many constitutional rights in our Bill of Rights, can go, oh wait, we're not going to oppress our government, or we're not going to oppress our people because they're armed and able to defend themselves, then that's the overarching point. Then the next question would be, well, how does that relate to modern history? I could tell you exactly, because I've served in those countries where I have brought guns to people. I have brought ammunition to people in Afghanistan, Iraq, in Yemen, in Libya, in Africa, where Gaddafi is a dictator. He's oppressing his own people and killing who he wants. Well, how do we get in between the people and the tyrannical government? We give guns to the Libyans. We give training, we give ammo, and guess what? They're able to turn the tides of war. And so they're able to defend themselves in freedom. So the Second Amendment is important because it also creates a society in which in freedom-loving states like Arizona, where I live, an old lady doesn't have to tell anybody that she's carrying a revolver inside of her purse. So if a criminal wants to rob her, he knows that because they're in Arizona, there's no law that regulates if that person is carrying that gun, that it would be illegal. So now they go psychologically, oh, I'm not going to worry about that person. This country, whether you call it fortunate or unfortunate or just indifferent, is founded off of weapons, off of guns. I mean, if you look at Japanese culture, look, if the Japanese had guns instead of samurai swords when they were invaded, essentially by the Americans when they were occupied, and they were told to put down their swords or you're going to die, and they were given guns to balance the powers, it would be a very different circumstance. I think the importance for people to understand is in a society where I carry a gun, and I carry a gun every day, I have the balance of powers not only between a tyrannical and crazy government, but also an evil and crazy man, right? If somebody wants to harm me and my family, I have a mechanism to defend myself. Now, Korea's in a different capacity because they don't have guns scattered throughout the population. We do. Mm-hmm. And so we're a gun culture. And whether you want to think that's unfortunate or not, we have to be able to operate in that gun culture. And the best way is allowing people to make that their own decision. Right. There are regulations. There are all laws. It's not crazy. The streets aren't loaded with people with guns. People aren't getting killed. Right. You know, a lot of that is based on Western media causing hysteria through propaganda, through media culture. Mm-hmm. Like 40,000 Americans die every year from guns. And when you hear that number, you go, oh my gosh, that's crazy. When a population of 350 million, with 60% of that 40,000 being suicides to gun, then you would go, oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait, maybe that's not the story here. And then when I tell you that only, and I hate to use the word only, but in defining statistics, 360 people out of the 40,000 were killed via mass shootings. And if you watch Western culture and media, you would think there's a mass shooting every day. Right. And on top of that, 400 people a year die falling out of tree stands while hunting in America. Right. By accidents. 30,000 people a year die from vehicle accidents in America. And not even quoting Korean statistics, there's a lot more people dying from other reasons that aren't guns, right. Including behavioral health issues of Americans killing themselves. Right. So it's not a gun problem. It's not. There's not mass hysteria with guns. It's more of a media propaganda problem.
Right. And it becomes ultra political because I feel like in Korea, they think that everyone carries a gun in the States, and that if you go to the States, that you have a high chance of getting shot. But you really don't. Statistically speaking, you really don't.
It's completely blown out of proportions. Look, 400,000 people a year die from cardiovascular disease, which includes heart attacks, which includes type 2 and type 1 diabetes. All of these fatalities, which includes cancer. 400,000 people. Fast food is a bigger issue systemically than guns will ever be, right? What's not reported is all the stories of people who are law-abiding citizens who are using guns to defend themselves, or law enforcement officers who are just using guns to defend human life in the streets.
Right.
I hate to hear that. Like in the city that I live in Arizona, there's been one murder in 10 years via a gun, and this is the most gun-friendly city and state in America. So it's not a huge problem here, and the only thing we could do is continue to educate people. Gun culture related to Hollywood and westernized culture and how that's disseminated is completely different, because it's what sells movies,
right.
Which I think is ironic, because the most liberal ideological people on the planet who are talking that guns are bad are the people who are using guns in the biggest platform in Hollywood, showing guns killing people, innocent people in many cases, right. In popular culture. So it's all about a balance, and guns historically have never been a significant issue in American culture. It's been propagated and propagandized that way.
Right. When I first came to Korea back in 2008, a cultural shock that I had was a lot of people, if you go to a cafe in Korea, when people are on their laptops, when they go to the bathroom, they leave their stuff. They leave their cell phones, they leave their laptops, and no one bats an eye. No one touches it, and you could be gone for a couple hours and you can come back, and your bags and your laptops are all still going to be there. And that really speaks to the level of sense of security in Korea. And I want to come back full circle to Fieldcraft and what you guys are doing, and teaching survival, teaching self-defense. In the context of the civilian world, especially considering what's going on with Corona in the United States specifically, because we've sort of flattened the curve in Korea. How relevant is it for someone to be prepared? And how relevant is it for someone to prepare for the worst? When people think survival in Korea, their immediate thought is rubbing sticks together to make fire, which is pretty freaking hard if someone's actually tried. What you guys are doing, this modernized version of survival, how does that translate to the civilian sector?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the whole example of leaving your stuff behind, because freedom breeds complacency, right? The more free you are in safety, the more complacent you are, which only means it's not necessarily a bad thing, which only means that cognitively you cannot allow yourself to automatically, subconsciously make mistakes, like leaving your stuff behind, like not paying attention to dangerous circumstance. Modern survival to me is definitively not rubbing sticks together in wood, because if you're at that timeline in your plan, you've done many things wrong, right? If you're naked and afraid in the woods, you've made a lot of mistakes.
Right.
So what I tell people is modern survival is just the conscious and deliberate planning, understanding, and then implementation of certain things to make yourself more statistically probable of surviving a bad situation. And look, it doesn't have to be, like, if I could use Korea, for example, it doesn't have to be a man-made disaster. I'm not talking about a guy walks into a store with a gun in Korea and then you have to be prepared to deal with that. Right. Because statistically, it's less likely to happen. I mean, I'd be very interested to look at statistics in Korea of what the most dangerous things are, right? What kills the most people? And it's more than likely cardiovascular disease, suicide, right? And accidents, right? The combination of all three of those things. Well, at Fieldcraft Survival, my company, we don't just talk about definitive bad guys coming out to attack good guys, because that wouldn't be very relevant to civilians because they don't experience that. Well, what we're talking about is, let's say you're in a beautiful part of Korea and you want to go on a hike where the temperature changes from day to night, swing 30 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Or from hot or warm or comfortable to extremely cold. Well, you trip, you break your leg or sprain your ankle, and now you're stuck. Well, we teach at Fieldcraft Survival, one, you should pre-plan that experience, planning for the worst case scenario, not the best case. The best case is part of that complacency. You put your laptop and your cell phone down and you go 100 times to the bathroom over a year and nobody touches your stuff. Well, if on the 101st time you come back and it's gone, then what's the worst case scenario? Well, it's all gone.
Right.
So then what if the behavior is, instead of just leaving it, you simply shut it down, put it in a bag, and you take it with you? That takes you an extra 15 seconds, and then you never get to the 101st time, and you plan for the worst case, which sets you up for success for everything in between.
Right.
So now you look at your routes when you go outside and you're going on this hike. You plan accordingly because you know that the extremities, which is tied to hypothermia, kill you the fastest.
Right.
In fact, in most instances, most people die in the first 24 hours from hypothermia. And if it's going to kill you, it's going to kill you. So do you have a space blanket to keep you warm? Do you have a lighter to start a fire to keep you warm? Do you have enough water, because 3 days without water will kill you? Do you have enough rations to survive? Those things is what we're concentrated on, because to be honest, man, I've seen a lot of companies, and especially our backgrounds, becoming sexy because the content's cool.
Right.
There's people teaching people to lockpick. There's people teaching people to shoot from helicopters.
Right.
But the probability and likelihood of that happening aren't likely. So if you're a civilian, how our company translates is we're talking about everyday things. 30,000 Americans die in car accidents every year. But that metric is because 9 million people are in accidents in vehicles every single year. So between 30,000 and 9 million, what specific things can I do as a person to treat my own medical wounds in trauma? You know, we have this saying, you are your own first response. Because if I'm in an accident in the middle of my farm in Korea, I don't want to have to wait for the paramedics to come rescue me.
Right.
If I'm in a bad situation in America, fighting for my life with a pistol from a bad guy, I'm not waiting for the SWAT team to arrive to save me. I want to be dependent, more reliant. Ultimately and finally, we want to build reliance in people. The more self-reliant you are to be accountable for yourself, the more likely you are to not put yourself in a bad circumstance. Look, Korea is on a peninsula. If there's an earthquake, just like Japan, you are in a very high likely geographical region to be affected by tsunamis.
Right.
A tsunami, the tsunami that hit Thailand, killed thousands of people. The people who understood how tsunamis and geographical disasters work, because they pay attention, they're in tune to survival, they survived. Unfortunately, thousands of people didn't. And if I was a Korean in Korea thinking or maybe potentially trying to apply this kind of stuff to your life, I would start by doing research and looking, what's the highest likelihood of you getting killed or injured? And then planning and living your life. In America, people who follow Fieldcraft live this lifestyle of preparedness, of being self-reliant. That's the most exciting thing for me, because it's the same lifestyle that me and you lived in special operations.
You know, when it comes to REDCELL, we're trying to provide that sort of content as well. Where can people find you online?
You could look up Fieldcraft Survival. It's, Fieldcraft is one word, survival is another word. But on all of our platforms on YouTube, it's the Fieldcraft Survival channel. Same with Instagram. We even have Fieldcraft Mobility that looks at using your vehicle as a platform for survival. We have a podcast on iTunes, on Spotify, called the Fieldcraft Survival Podcast. You can find me personally. It's at Mike Glover, Glover. And I post a whole bunch of content that's relevant to survival and everything else. And then fieldcraftsurvival.com. That all of our stuff's there, and we do ship internationally. We have a lot of people that follow us in Japan and Korea, and we ship all over the world. Yeah. No, I'd say kamsahamnida. That feeling's mutual, man. I'd love to get to Korea. I'd love for you to come over here and do some cross-pollination, and I want to say thank you. And it's channels like this which are creating channels like yours which are creating the connection between the U.S. and Korea, which I think is very important, because we are more similar than we are dissimilar. And when you take two military special operations guys that are creating a connection between people and bridging that gap, that's super important. And I'd love to get there. I'd love to have a translator and do a survival seminar in Korea. I want to get there because I want to teach my family about Korea. I want to eat Korean food. I'm craving some bibimbap and some jjajangmyeon. And I just appreciate the opportunity, man. Thank you so much.